course, as we've been going through Jesus' bread of life discourse, the crowds have had a hard time believing what he was saying about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, which is true food and drink. In some ways, we can't blame him, I guess, because just before the Last Supper, and even the apostles, probably didn't quite put it all together yet. But even throughout the centuries, of course, people have had a hard time with the idea that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. And so, from time to time, God has allowed these Eucharistic miracles with the Eucharist, in order to help re-enliven the faith of people and show that he is truly there, present in the Eucharist. The first one of these that really is known happened in Lanciano, Italy, about the year 700. As a result of this monk priest who was struggling with Christ's true presence in the Eucharist. And once he was at Mass, he held up the host and he held the chalice during the consecration. Afterwards, the host turned to flesh and the wine turned to blood. And they have remained in that state for like the last 1,300 years. And over the centuries, they've done some investigations on this, starting in the 1500s, most recently in the 1900s. Some scientific, verifiable research that has shown that it was real flesh and real blood, that it was from a human being, and that the flesh was actually heart muscle, and that flesh and that blood shared the same blood type, AB, just like they found on the Shroud of Turin. In Bolsena in Italy in 1263, so another priest, a German priest, who was struggling with Christ, the idea of Christ present in the Eucharist. And he was passing through this town of Bolsena as he was making a pilgrimage to Rome, and at Mass, as he held up the host, it started to seep. It started to drip blood all over his hands and onto the corporal, which is a little white cloth that we put on the altar. It's called the corporal because the body of Christ goes on it. Of course, he was startled by the whole thing, and so he took that to this nearby town of Orvieto, where Pope Urban IV was living at the time, and that has remained there in Orvieto for all these centuries. And it was the year after that Pope Urban created the great feast of Corpus Christi, which we still celebrate after Easter. In the town of Blenheim, France, in 1331, at a Mass, one of the last people to receive communion was a woman named Jacquette. So the priest put the host on her tongue and then went back to the altar. But the host fell off of her tongue and landed on this cloth right in front of her. And some people noticed that, and so they went and grabbed the priest, and he came back to look. And instead of seeing a host on this cloth, it was a spot of blood, like that host had dissolved into blood. So he took that back to the sacristy, little workroom, and he tried to clean it off. And instead of it becoming lighter and smaller, that spot actually became bigger and darker, and he took it out of the basin, which had also then become bloodied. And he and the people with him were like, "This is the precious blood of Jesus Christ." They were amazed. In the town of Avignon, France, 1433, a little different type of Eucharistic miracle. They had the Blessed Sacrament out for some perpetual adoration, and it just rained for days. And so the rivers in that town of Avignon, they just flooded the whole town. And these two friars got in this boat, and they rowed over to the church, expecting their little church to be completely ruined. But what they saw was around the church, there was water 4 feet high surrounding the church, with a pathway that led from the entryway up into the altar, which was all just completely dry, and the Blessed Sacrament unharmed. They got other people, it was like to verify this miracle. It's kind of like the parting of the Red Sea, with in Exodus. 1730 in Siena, Italy. It was August 14th, So the night before the great Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary that we just celebrated, and the whole town was out for this great feast and this big procession, kind of like they had down in Cary the other night. So since the whole town was at this celebration, a couple of thieves went into the empty church of St. Francis, and they picked the lock on the tabernacle, and they took the ciborium, which is the vessel that we hold the hosts in, and all the hosts with it. Of course, the people were mortified and upset, and they prayed to God for mercy and asked for his help in getting those sacred particles, those sacred elements back. So a couple days later, on August 17th, someone was praying in another church nearby and noticed something white popping out of the offering box. And so they went to check it out, and among all the cobwebs and the dust were all the sacred hosts. And some of those were used for communion over the years. Some of those still remain perfectly preserved after 300 years. Of course, all these seem to be in Italy or France. Maybe back then, what happened in other parts of the world, people didn't quite know about so much. But these Eucharistic miracles are not just in the past either, even though the remnants of those remain today through the preservation of these miracles. In Buenos Aires, Argentina, in 1996, there was a host that dropped on the floor when someone was receiving communion, and he just kind of left it there, which you're not supposed to do. I think he just thought it was soiled, and why bother? But someone came and picked it up, put it in a vessel filled with water to dissolve it, which is what you're supposed to do, and then put it in the tabernacle. That's the procedure. But when they looked, days later, a week and a half later, what they saw were red stains on the host. And it turned out they then went and brought this to the Archbishop, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, now Pope Francis. And he wanted to wait a few years to check this out. Turns out there was another miracle in this parish in 1992 where a host bled. So finally he decided it was time to check this out. And so this researcher, I guess, I don't know who he was, took both samples, again, to have them scientifically analyzed, and found that they were, again, an AB blood type, like with Lanciano and the Shroud, that these samples had human DNA, that they had intact muscle cells and white blood cells, which are early only in living blood, and that it was determined that this heart tissue was inflamed like someone who was in great pain. And after years of study, this one professor, he said to the person that brought them these samples from that parish, he said, if they had white blood cells active in them, that heart must have been bleeding when you brought me those samples. He says, when you brought me those samples, that heart was alive. 2001 in India, there's a priest that noticed 3 dots on a host, put it in the tabernacle for a week. When he came back a week later, he noticed that host now had a human face on it. Mexico in 2006, there was a religious sister who was distributing communion, and at one point she stopped because she noticed that host was emitting a red substance. So she came to the priest, in tears. And so this was analyzed like so many others, and again had the AB blood type, like with the Lanciano and the Shroud and at Buenos Aires, and that it was living heart tissue with human DNA. In Poland in 2008, a priest accidentally dropped a host, so he did what you're supposed to do. You put it in a container with water, put it in the tabernacle to let it dissolve. And then, by the way, once it dissolves, you you empty it into the sacrarium, which is our special sink that goes right into the ground. Don't do that. But a religious sister went a week later and noticed that instead of that host dissolving, there was this aroma of bread that was coming from it, and that it also had this stain on it that was growing. So they took it to the bishop, So he took the host out of the container, put it on the corporal, put that in a tabernacle for 3 years. After 3 years, they noticed that it kind of had the blood, the red spot had dried up, kind of like a blood clot, or a scab, and that the fibers of the heart tissue and of the part of the bread that was still remaining were so intertwined that it'd be impossible for any human being to do this. And when they analyzed this, of course, it was found that it was heart tissue of a living person who was near death. 2013, another town in Poland, a host fell, put it in the container for dissolving, but again, instead, red stains appeared, analyzed, found to be human DNA, heart tissue of someone who had been in great agony. Honduras in 2022, someone found a stained corporal in the tabernacle, took it for analysis, again, AB blood type. Closer to home, there's amazing things that happen as well. So in just last year, in 2023, this has not been scientifically verified yet, but there was a parish in Thomaston, Connecticut. They were running out of hosts at Mass. We try our best here not to do that. They were running out, and they just sort of kept miraculously multiplying. Just back in May, in Bardstown, Oklahoma, there was an EF4 tornado that hit the town. And the parish church there, of course, the stained glass windows were blown out, the entrance was destroyed, but the tabernacle remained untouched, and the sanctuary lamp, which is our red candle there to let you know Jesus is at home, just was still lit. Finally, this one comes from Catholic Youth Summer Camp. I found this at the Book of Miracles that they have at the Damascus Catholic Mission Campus in Central Ohio. I didn't tear out the page. I took a picture and printed it out. July 15th, 2020. Since last night, I have been really struggling to truly believe in Jesus' presence in the Eucharist. I have been praying for God to show me a sign or help me believe. At Mass today, I went up to receive communion. As I placed it on my tongue, I asked him again, Jesus, help me to believe. Remove all this doubt from my mind. When I got back to my pew and knelt down with the Eucharist still on my tongue, I felt it start to make a heartbeat. I could feel Jesus' heart beating in the Eucharist. It lasted around 30 seconds, and as soon as I felt it, I just burst into tears, because I knew God had answered my prayers. Maybe you're asking yourself, why does this stuff that doesn't happen here? I think for one, let's just be honest, it might get a little messy. But also I think ultimately we're to hold this in faith. But not a blind faith, as we can see from all these examples, from the one who on the night before he was to die for us says, this is my body, this is my blood, and explained the whole thing in John chapter 6. So let us not doubt that as we encounter Christ here in the Mass today, that this same Jesus is present in the same sacrament of his body, blood, soul, and divinity here in this holy place, to feed his holy people and to continue to give us life, a life that lasts forever.